What if beneath the white silence of the coldest continent on Earth, something older than memory waits? Not in myth, but in stone. What if the maps we've drawn of Antarctica's past were redrawn not by time, but by forgetting? Hello there and welcome to Unrevealed Historian, where curiosity gets cozy and the ancient world slips quietly into the space between thought and sleep. If you find this expedition soothing, I'd be grateful if you left a like or let this channel keep you company again. Settle in. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you now. I like to imagine our quiet map glowing across the world because tonight we are trespassing into memory. We are going to Antarctica. Not the Antarctica of ice and isolation, but the Antarctica of legend. The Antarctica that some believe was once warm, once green, once inhabited. And at the center of this riddle stands a structure, a pyramid-shaped mountain that refuses to let go of human imagination. It was discovered, some say, in the early 1900s, though records were suppressed. It emerged again in satellite images in 2016, stark and angular, rising from the Ellsworth Mountains like a geometric ghost. And though geologists insist it is natural, formed by freeze-thaw erosion over millions of years, others ask a quieter question. What if it isn't? Tonight, we trace the edges of that question, not to answer it but to walk alongside it, through ancient cartography, through the fossil record, through Sumerian cosmology and the coded memory of a world that may have existed long before the ice. This is not a story of certainty. It is a story of patterns, of shapes that repeat, of knowledge that survived when it shouldn't have, and it begins, as so many forgotten things do, with a map. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis completed a map of the world. It was drawn on gazelle skin, inked with precision, annotated in Turkish and Arabic. The map showed the coastline of South America with startling accuracy, an accuracy that should not have been possible, given the tools and knowledge available at the time. But that was not the strangest part. At the southern edge of the map there was a landmass, a coast, a place where no coast should exist, because in 1513 Antarctica had not yet been discovered. The official record states that Antarctica was first sighted in 1820, more than 3 centuries later. And yet there it was on Piri Reis's map, a southern continent, drawn with care, with bays and inlets, as though someone had sailed there and returned to tell the tale. Piri Reis himself claimed he did not invent the map. He wrote in his annotations that he had compiled it from older sources, some from the time of Alexander the Great, others even older. He said he had used more than 20 ancient maps, charts that had survived from civilizations that no longer existed, maps that had been copied and recopied, passed down through the Library of Alexandria, through Byzantine scriptoriums, through the hands of sailors and scholars who carried the memory of a world that had been. The question, then, is this. If Antarctica was mapped before it was discovered, who mapped it? And when? Some researchers have proposed that the coastline depicted on the Piri Reis map is not the ice-covered Antarctica we know today, but Antarctica as it appeared thousands of years ago, before the ice. They point to studies suggesting that parts of Antarctica may have been ice-free as recently as 4000 BCE, during a period of warmer global climate. If that is true, then the maps Piri Reis used could have originated from an ancient seafaring civilization, one that explored the southern continent when it was still habitable. Others go further. They suggest that the map is evidence of a lost global civilization, one that possessed advanced knowledge of geography and navigation long before the rise of Egypt or Sumer, a civilization that mapped the entire world and then vanished, leaving only fragments, maps, monuments, myths behind. Mainstream historians dismiss these claims. They argue that the southern landmass on the Piri Reis map is simply a distortion, a cartographic error common in the age of exploration. They point out that mapmakers often filled in unknown areas with speculation, creating landmasses that did not exist or exaggerating the size of known continents. But the dismissal does not erase the unease. Because the Piri Reis map is not alone, there are other maps. The Orontius Phineus map of 1531, the Philippe Buech map of 1754, both show Antarctica. Both show it with rivers, with mountains, with coastlines free of ice. The Buech map even depicts Antarctica as two separate landmasses, divided by a body of water, a detail that was only confirmed in the 20th century, when ice-penetrating radar revealed that beneath the ice sheet, Antarctica is indeed two continents separated by a subglacial sea. How did Philippe Buech know this in 1754? The conventional explanation is that he was extrapolating, making educated guesses based on the incomplete data available to him. But the accuracy of his guess is troubling. It suggests that somewhere in the chain of transmission, there was knowledge, real empirical knowledge, of what lay beneath the ice. And if that knowledge existed, it could only have come from one source: direct observation. Someone at some point in history saw Antarctica without its ice. This is the first thread, the first suggestion that the world we think we know is not the world that was. That beneath the frozen silence of the southern continent, there is a story, etched not in myth, but in geography. And the pyramid is part of that story. The Ellsworth Mountains stretch for more than 400 kilometers across West Antarctica. They are ancient, formed approximately 150 million years ago during the Jurassic period, when Antarctica was still connected to the supercontinent Gondwana. The mountains are composed of sedimentary and metamorphic rocks, layers of stone that have been compressed, heated, and transformed over eons. They are a geological archive, a record of tectonic shifts, volcanic activity, and climatic change. Within this range, in a region known as the Heritage Range, there is a peak. It is unnamed. It rises to a height of 4,150 feet, which is modest by Antarctic standards. But its shape is not modest. It is pyramidal, perfectly symmetrical, with four steep sides converging at a sharp apex. From above, it looks almost too precise, too deliberate, as though it had been designed rather than formed. The coordinates are 79 degrees 5839.25 S, 81 degrees 5732.21 W. You can find it on Google Earth. You can zoom in, trace the edges, measure the angles. And when you do, you will see what thousands of others have seen: a structure that resembles, in every visible detail, the pyramids of Giza, of Teotihuacan, of the Nubian desert. The resemblance is so striking that when satellite images of the peak were first circulated online in 2016, they went viral. Speculation erupted. Was this evidence of an ancient civilization in Antarctica? Had humans, or something else, built a pyramid at the bottom of the world? And if so, when? And why? Mainstream geologists were quick to respond. Dr. Mitch Darcy, a geologist at the German Research Center for Geosciences, explained that the peak is a nunatak, a natural rock formation that protrudes through the ice sheet. He noted that the pyramidal shape is the result of erosion, specifically freeze-thaw weathering, in which water seeps into cracks in the rock, freezes, expands, and causes fragments to break off. Over time, this process can create sharp, angular peaks. Darcy also pointed out that the Ellsworth Mountains are extensive, and it is not surprising that some peaks would have unusual shapes. The pyramid, he said, is simply a coincidence, a natural formation that happens to resemble a human-made structure. Dr. Eric Rignot, a professor of Earth System Science at the University of California, Irvine, offered a similar explanation. He noted that the uniformity of the pyramid's shape suggests that the rock is composed of a single type of stone, which erodes at a consistent rate. This would produce a symmetrical peak, rather than the irregular, jagged shapes typical of mountains made from multiple rock types. The scientific consensus, then, is clear. The Antarctic pyramid is not a pyramid at all. It is a mountain, a natural geological feature, nothing more. And yet, the explanations, while logical, do not fully satisfy. Because the pyramid is not the only anomaly in Antarctica, there are others. structures detected beneath the ice, formations that do not fit the expected patterns of glacial geology. And while scientists insist these anomalies are the result of subglacial lakes or unusual ice dynamics, the pattern persists. There is something in Antarctica that does not quite belong. Moreover, the pyramid's symmetry is extraordinary. Freeze-thaw erosion does create angular peaks, but they are rarely as uniform as this one. The four sides of the Antarctic peak are nearly identical in slope and length. The apex is centered. The base is square. If this is the result of random erosion, it is a remarkably precise accident, and accidents of this kind are rare. There is also the question of context. Pyramids are found throughout the ancient world: Egypt, Sudan, Mexico, Peru, China, Indonesia, Bosnia. These structures were built by disparate cultures, separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, and yet they share a common form: the pyramid, a shape that appears again and again in places that should have had no contact with one another. Why? The conventional answer is that the pyramid is a simple, stable structure, easy to build, resistant to collapse. It is the natural solution to the engineering problem of creating a large, enduring monument. Different cultures arrived at the same solution independently. But there is another possibility. A possibility that the pyramid is not a solution, but a memory. A shape carried forward from an earlier time, when a single global civilization built these structures as part of a network: markers, observatories, energy nodes, or something else entirely. If that civilization existed, and if it existed before the ice, then Antarctica would have been part of its domain, and the pyramid in the Ellsworth Mountains would not be a mountain at all. It would be a remnant. To understand whether Antarctica could have hosted a civilization, we must first understand what Antarctica was. Today, it is the coldest, driest, windiest continent on Earth. The average temperature in the interior is -60 degrees Celsius. The ice sheet that covers it is up to 4.8 kilometers thick in places, containing 90% of the world's ice and 70% of its freshwater. Nothing grows there except lichen and moss in the brief summer thaw along the coasts. No trees, no grass, no soil. But it was not always this way. In 2017, a team of scientists drilled into the seabed near Pine Island Glacier on Antarctica's west coast. They extracted sediment cores, cylinders of ancient mud and rock, each layer representing a different period in Earth's history. The cores were brought to the surface, carefully cataloged and transported to laboratories for analysis. What they found was astonishing. The sediment contained pollen, seeds, plant fibers, fragments of roots, all preserved in the frozen mud, perfectly intact despite being millions of years old. When the scientists examined the samples under microscopes, they identified the remains of conifers, ferns, and flowering plants, species that could only have thrived in a temperate, forested environment. The dating of the sediment placed it in the Cretaceous period, approximately 90 million years ago. At that time, Antarctica was not at the South Pole. It was part of Gondwana, the southern supercontinent, and its climate was warm and humid. Dinosaurs roamed its forests. Rivers flowed through its valleys. It was a living land. But the discovery did not stop there. In 2020, the same research team found additional sediment samples that dated to a much more recent period, around 50 to 30 million years ago, during the Eocene epoch. These samples also contain plant material, indicating that even after the breakup of Gondwana, Antarctica remained forested. It was not until the onset of the Oligocene glaciation, around 34 million years ago, that the ice began to form. And then, in a discovery that sent ripples through the scientific community, researchers found amber. Amber is fossilized tree resin. It forms when resin seeps from a wounded tree, hardens, and is buried in sediment. Over millions of years, it transforms into a translucent, golden stone. Amber is remarkable because it preserves organic material with extraordinary fidelity. Insects, leaves, feathers, Even drops of water can be trapped inside, perfectly intact. The amber found off the coast of Antarctica was approximately 90 million years old. It was small, only visible under a microscope, but its presence was significant. Amber indicates the presence of resin-producing trees, which means that Antarctica was not only forested, but densely forested, with large trees that lived long enough to produce significant quantities of resin. The amber also showed signs of damage, suggesting that the trees had been injured, perhaps by wildfires or by parasites or by storms. This tells us that Antarctica's ancient climate was dynamic, with seasonal changes, weather patterns, and ecological pressures similar to those found in temperate forests today. But here is the question. If Antarctica was forested as recently as 30 million years ago, could it have remained ice-free even longer? Could there have been a period, much closer to the present, when parts of Antarctica were habitable? Some researchers believe the answer is yes. There is evidence to suggest that during interglacial periods, brief windows of warmer climate between ice ages, the Antarctic ice sheet partially melted, exposing land along the coasts and in the interior. The most recent of these warm periods occurred around 6,000 to 4,000 BCE, during the Holocene climate optimum. During this time, global temperatures were several degrees warmer than they are today. Glaciers retreated, sea levels rose, and it is possible, though not proven, that parts of Antarctica became ice-free. If this is true, then Antarctica could have been explored and even settled by an ancient seafaring people. The maps that depict Antarctica without ice could be based on real observations, made during this brief window of habitability. And the pyramid could be a structure built during this time, later buried beneath the advancing ice as the climate cooled and the glaciers returned. This is, of course, speculative. There is no direct evidence of human habitation in Antarctica during the Holocene. No artifacts have been found. No tools, no pottery, no remains. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Antarctica is the least explored continent on Earth. More than 99% of its surface is covered by ice. What lies beneath is largely unknown, and what is known is strange. In recent years, deep penetrating radar has allowed scientists to peer beneath Antarctica's ice sheet. The technology works by sending radio waves into the ice, which bounce back when they encounter changes in density, rock, water, or air. By analyzing the reflected signals, researchers can create detailed maps of the subglacial landscape. What they have found is a hidden world. Beneath the ice of East Antarctica, near the Aurora and Schmidt subglacial basins, there are valleys. Not small, eroded gullies, but massive river valleys, some more than 100 kilometers long and several kilometers wide. These valleys are ancient, dating back to a time before the ice, when Antarctica was a land of flowing water and green forests. The valleys are remarkably well preserved. The weight of the ice has protected them from erosion, freezing them in time. Scientists have called this hidden terrain the ghost landscape of Antarctica, a relic of a world that existed millions of years ago, now locked beneath miles of ice. But the ghost landscape is not just a geological curiosity. It is also a map. The valleys follow the contours of the land, tracing the paths of ancient rivers that once flowed toward the coast. By mapping these rivers, scientists can reconstruct what Antarctica looked like before the ice, a land of highlands and lowlands, of watersheds and deltas, of ecosystems that thrived in a climate very different from today's. And here is where the story becomes strange. Some of the subglacial features detected by radar do not fit the expected patterns of natural geology. There are areas where the ice has melted from below, creating cavities and tunnels. There are magnetic anomalies, regions where the Earth's magnetic field is distorted, suggesting the presence of large metallic deposits or unusual rock formations. And there are structures, rectangular, linear, geometric, that some researchers believe could be artificial. The mainstream scientific community is cautious about these claims. They point out that subglacial lakes, volcanic activity, and mineral deposits can all create unusual radar signatures. The structures detected beneath the ice are likely natural formations, they say, oddities of geology, not evidence of ancient construction. But the doubt lingers, because the structures are not random. They are organized. They appear in clusters, and in some cases they align with the subglacial valleys as though they were built along the banks of ancient rivers. If these structures are artificial, they would represent the most significant archaeological discovery in human history. They would prove that Antarctica was once inhabited, not by scattered hunter-gatherers, but by a civilization capable of large-scale construction, a civilization that built along rivers, in valleys, in places that are now buried beneath 2 miles of ice. And if that civilization built in Antarctica, it likely built elsewhere as well, in places that are not buried, in places where the structures still stand, places like Egypt, like Mexico, like Peru. And those structures, those pyramids, might not be isolated monuments. They might be part of a network, a global architecture built by a global people. This is the theory. This is the pattern. And the Antarctic pyramid is the key. To understand the possibility of a lost global civilization, we must turn to the oldest written records we possess, the Sumerian tablets. Sumer was the world's first urban civilization, emerging in Mesopotamia around 450 BCE. The Sumerians invented writing, the wheel, irrigation, and complex mathematics. They built cities with temples and palaces. They recorded their history in cuneiform script, pressed into clay tablets that have survived for more than 6,000 years. And in those tablets, they wrote about the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are described in Sumerian mythology as a group of deities who descended from the heavens and taught humanity the arts of civilization. They were the gods of kingship, of justice, of agriculture and architecture. They were not abstract, distant gods. They were described as physical beings who walked among humans, who ate and drank, who interacted with the world in tangible ways. The Sumerians recorded the names of the Anunnaki, their genealogies, their ranks and responsibilities. They described the Anunnaki's home as the Abzu, a place beneath the earth or across the sea, depending on the text. They said the Anunnaki came to Earth to mine gold, and that they created humans to serve as workers in the mines. Mainstream scholars interpret these stories as myths, allegories for natural forces, or symbolic representations of social hierarchy. The Anunnaki, they say, are not real beings. They are literary devices, religious metaphors, cultural constructs. But there is another way to read the texts. What if the Anunnaki were not gods but people? Advanced people from an advanced civilization who arrived in Sumer and introduced technology that seemed magical to the indigenous population. What if the descent from the heavens was not a literal descent from the sky, but a metaphor for arrival from across the sea, from a distant land, perhaps from a land that is now submerged or frozen or otherwise lost? This interpretation is not new. It was popularized by authors like Zecharia Sitchin and Erich von Däniken, who argued that the Anunnaki were extraterrestrial visitors. But the extraterrestrial hypothesis is unnecessary. The Anunnaki could just as easily have been human, members of an advanced civilization that predated Sumer, and whose knowledge was passed down through myth and legend. If such a civilization existed, where was it? Some researchers point to Atlantis, the lost island civilization described by Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. According to Plato, Atlantis was a powerful maritime empire that existed around 960 BCE, before it was destroyed by earthquakes and floods and sank into the ocean. Plato claimed that the story of Atlantis was told to the Greek lawgiver Solon by Egyptian priests, who said it was part of their ancient records. Mainstream historians dismiss Atlantis as a fictional allegory, a cautionary tale about hubris and divine punishment. But Plato insisted it was real. He provided details, geographic, political, architectural, that suggest he was describing a specific place, not inventing a fable. And if Atlantis was real, where was it? One possibility is Antarctica. The theory is this: before the ice, Antarctica was habitable. It was part of a global network of advanced societies, connected by maritime trade. This network included not only Antarctica, but also regions that would later become Sumer, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica. These societies shared knowledge, astronomy, architecture, agriculture, and they built similar structures as part of a common cultural heritage. Around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, a catastrophic event occurred. Some researchers point to the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which suggests that a massive meteor bombardment struck the Earth, triggering sudden climate change. The impacts caused wildfires, floods, and a rapid cooling period that lasted for more than 1,000 years. Glaciers advanced, sea levels rose, entire regions were submerged or buried under ice. Antarctica, which had been on the edge of habitability, was plunged into a deep freeze. Its cities, if they existed, were covered by ice. Its people fled, migrating to warmer regions, to Mesopotamia, to Egypt, to the Americas, carrying with them fragments of their knowledge and culture. Over time, the memory of Antarctica faded. It became a myth, a legend of a lost land, a golden age, a time when the gods walked the earth. The knowledge was encoded in stories, in rituals, in the architecture of pyramids and temples that mimicked the structures of the lost civilization. And the maps, those impossible maps that show Antarctica without ice, were the last remnants of direct observation, copied and recopied until their origins were forgotten. This is the theory, and while it is speculative, it is not baseless. It is built on patterns, on correlations, on the strange, persistent echoes of a world that might have been. Orion correlation theory, aligning Orion's belt stars with Giza pyramid outlines, an alignment rejected by astronomers if a global civilization existed. Its most visible legacy would be its architecture, and the most enduring architectural form across ancient cultures is the pyramid. Pyramids are found on every inhabited continent. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza stands as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, built with such precision that the sides of its square base vary by less than 2 inches. In Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan covers an area larger than any Egyptian pyramid. In Peru, the pyramids of Caral date to 260 BCE, making them among the oldest in the Americas. In Sudan, more than 200 Nubian pyramids rise from the desert, built by the Kingdom of Kush. In China, the massive mausoleum of the first Qin emperor is flanked by pyramidal mounds. In Indonesia, the Gunung Padang site contains megalithic structures that some researchers believe are remnants of a pyramid complex dating back more than 10,000 years. And in Bosnia, the so-called Bosnian pyramids, while controversial, have attracted attention for their geometric precision and alignment with cardinal directions. The conventional explanation for this global distribution is independent invention. Pyramids, the argument goes, are simple structures. They are stable, easy to build with primitive tools, and naturally impressive. It is not surprising that different cultures arrived at the same form, but the simplicity argument does not account for the sophistication of these structures. The Great Pyramid of Giza is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees. Its dimensions encode mathematical constants, including pi and the golden ratio. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan is aligned to the setting sun on specific calendar dates, suggesting advanced astronomical knowledge. The pyramids of Giza are positioned in a pattern that some researchers claim mirrors the constellation Orion, a correlation known as the Orion correlation theory. These are not simple structures. They are engineered monuments, built with precise knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, and geography. Moreover, the pyramids are not isolated. They are often part of larger complexes that include temples, causeways, and astronomical observatories. They are aligned with celestial bodies and geographic features. They are built using massive stone blocks, some weighing more than 70 tons, transported from quarries miles away and fitted together with such precision that a knife blade cannot fit between them. This level of engineering suggests a shared knowledge base, a common set of principles and techniques that was applied across different regions and time periods. But how could this knowledge have been shared? The civilizations that built these pyramids were separated by vast distances and had no known contact with one another. The Egyptians did not know about the Maya. The Maya did not know about the Nubians. And yet they all built pyramids. One possibility is diffusion, the spread of ideas through trade, migration, or conquest. But the timeline does not support this. The Egyptian pyramids were built around 250 BCE. The pyramids of Caral in Peru were built around the same time. The pyramids of Mesoamerica were built much later, starting around 1000 BCE. If diffusion were the explanation, we would expect to see a clear progression, with pyramids spreading from a single point of origin. Instead, they appear suddenly in multiple locations, with no clear link between them. Another possibility is that the pyramid is an archetype, a universal symbol embedded in the human psyche, expressed independently by different cultures. This is the explanation favored by Jungian psychologists, who argue that certain shapes and symbols recur across cultures because they tap into deep, collective patterns of thought. But the archetype explanation does not account for the technical similarities, the mathematical ratios, the astronomical alignments, the engineering techniques. These are not symbolic expressions. They are practical applications of advanced knowledge. Which brings us to the third possibility, a common origin. If the pyramid builders inherited their knowledge from an earlier civilization, one that existed before the rise of Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley, then the global distribution of pyramids makes sense. The knowledge was passed down, preserved, and applied by successor cultures who built their own pyramids as a way of honoring or imitating the original structures. And if that original civilization existed in Antarctica before the ice, then the pyramid in the Ellsworth Mountains could be the source. The first pyramid, the prototype from which all others were derived. This is, of course, highly speculative, but it is not without evidence. The Piri Reis map, the subglacial valleys, the fossil record, the Sumerian tablets, the global distribution of pyramids. Each piece on its own can be explained away, but together they form a pattern that suggests something was forgotten, something that might still be there beneath the ice. One of the central questions in the debate over Antarctic civilization is this: if a civilization existed in Antarctica, why have we found no evidence of it? The answer may lie in the ice itself. Ice is one of the most effective preservatives in nature. It halts decay. It stops bacterial growth. It locks organic material in a frozen state for thousands, even millions of years. In Siberia, the frozen carcasses of woolly mammoths have been found with flesh, fur, and internal organs intact, so well preserved that scientists have extracted DNA from their cells. In the Alps, the body of Ötzi the Iceman was discovered, frozen for more than 5,000 years, his clothing, tools, and even the contents of his stomach perfectly preserved. If a civilization existed in Antarctica before the ice, its remains would be similarly preserved. Buildings, tools, artworks, bodies, all frozen in place waiting to be discovered. But discovery requires excavation, and in Antarctica, excavation is nearly impossible. The ice sheet is up to 4.8 kilometers thick. Drilling through it is slow, expensive, and technically challenging. Moreover, Antarctica is protected by international treaty. The Antarctic Treaty System, established in 1959, prohibits military activity, mineral mining, and nuclear testing on the continent. It also restricts archaeological excavation, requiring that any such activity be conducted with the utmost care to avoid environmental damage. As a result, the vast majority of Antarctica remains unexplored. We have mapped its surface with satellites. We have used radar to probe its interior, but we have not dug, we have not uncovered, we have not seen what lies beneath. And so the absence of evidence is not surprising. It is expected. Antarctica is a locked archive, and the key is ice. But the ice is melting. Due to climate change, the Antarctic ice sheet is losing mass at an accelerating rate. Glaciers are retreating. Ice shelves are collapsing. As the ice melts, it exposes land that has been hidden for thousands of years. And in some cases, it reveals surprises. In 2016, a cave entrance was discovered in Antarctica, visible in satellite images. The entrance is large, approximately 74 feet high and 250 feet wide, large enough to hide a passenger jet. It is located at the foot of a mountain, and it appears to have steps leading into it, carved into the rock. The discovery sparked intense speculation. Was this the entrance to an ancient structure, a hidden base, a natural cave? Scientists believe it is natural, a result of ice melt and erosion. But the steps are troubling. They are dark, angular, and evenly spaced, resembling a staircase. And while erosion can create step-like formations, the regularity of these steps is unusual. The cave entrance has appeared and disappeared in satellite images over the years, suggesting that it is periodically covered by snow and then exposed again. This makes it difficult to study, but its existence raises a question. If one large cave entrance can be hidden and revealed by the ice, what else might be hidden? How many other structures, how many other formations are waiting beneath the snow? And as the ice continues to melt, what will we find? There is another element to the Antarctic mystery, one that is less scientific and more political. And that is the question of access. Antarctica is the only continent on Earth with no indigenous population, no permanent settlements, and no sovereign government. It is governed by the Antarctic Treaty System, a series of international agreements that regulate activity on the continent. The treaty was signed in 1959 by 12 countries, including the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom. Today, more than 50 countries are signatories. The treaty has been praised as a model of international cooperation. It designates Antarctica as a scientific preserve, dedicated to peace and research. It prohibits military bases, weapons testing, and territorial claims. It requires that all scientific findings be shared openly. But the treaty also restricts exploration. Any activity in Antarctica must be approved by the treaty signatories. Archaeological excavation, in particular, is heavily regulated. And while the stated reason for these restrictions is environmental protection, some researchers believe there are other motives. If evidence of a pre-ice civilization were to be found in Antarctica, it would fundamentally challenge our understanding of human history. It would suggest that advanced societies existed thousands of years before the rise of Sumer and Egypt. It would imply that much of what we believe about the development of civilization is incomplete, if not incorrect. Such a discovery would have profound implications, not just for archaeology but for politics, religion, and national identity. It would disrupt established narratives. It would raise uncomfortable questions about what else has been hidden, forgotten, or suppressed. And so, some argue, there is an incentive to keep Antarctica locked, to control who explores it, to limit what is found, to ensure that any discoveries are managed carefully, released slowly, and interpreted in ways that do not destabilize the existing order. This is, of course, speculation. There is no direct evidence of a coordinated cover-up, but the pattern is there. The restrictions, the secrecy, the fact that certain regions of Antarctica are off-limits to independent researchers, the fact that some satellite images are redacted or obscured, the fact that when anomalies are detected, cave entrances, pyramidal peaks, magnetic irregularities, they are explained away quickly without further investigation. It is also worth noting that several countries maintain permanent research stations in Antarctica, and some of these stations are operated by military organizations. The United States, for example, runs McMurdo Station, which is staffed by personnel from the U.S. Navy and Air Force. Russia operates Vostok Station, which has been the site of controversial drilling projects into subglacial Lake Vostok, one of the largest and most mysterious bodies of water on the planet. What are they looking for? Officially, the research is focused on climate science, glaciology, and astrobiology. But the presence of military personnel and the classification of certain findings suggest that there may be other interests at play. Again, this is speculative, but the pattern persists. If a civilization did exist in Antarctica, what happened to it? Why did it disappear? The answer may lie in a period of Earth's history known as the Younger Dryas. The Younger Dryas was a sudden return to Ice Age conditions that occurred approximately 12,800 years ago, just as the planet was emerging from the last glacial period. For more than 1,000 years, global temperatures plummeted, glaciers advanced, sea levels dropped, the climate became harsh and unstable. The cause of the Younger Dryas has been debated for decades. The traditional explanation is that it was triggered by a disruption in ocean currents, caused by the sudden release of freshwater from melting glaciers. This influx of cold water altered the Gulf Stream, causing temperatures in the northern hemisphere to drop. But in recent years, a new hypothesis has gained attention: the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. According to this theory, the Younger Dryas was caused by a massive meteor bombardment. Around 12,800 years ago, a comet or asteroid entered the Earth's atmosphere and broke apart, raining fragments down on multiple continents. The impacts caused widespread wildfires, destroyed ecosystems, and threw massive amounts of dust and soot into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and triggering a rapid cooling event. Evidence for the impact hypothesis includes layers of sediment from the Younger Dryas period that contain high concentrations of iridium, platinum, and nanodiamonds, materials that are typically found in extraterrestrial objects. There are also widespread deposits of black carbon, indicating massive fires. And in some regions, there is evidence of sudden flooding, consistent with the rapid melting of glaciers caused by the heat of the impacts. The impact hypothesis is controversial. Many scientists argue that the evidence is inconclusive and that the anomalies can be explained by other processes. But the hypothesis has gained support from researchers who study mass extinction events and catastrophic climate change. If the Younger Dryas was caused by a meteor bombardment, the effects on human civilization would have been devastating. Coastal cities would have been flooded. Agricultural lands would have been destroyed. Entire populations would have been displaced or wiped out. And Antarctica, which had been on the edge of habitability, would have been pushed into a permanent freeze. The glaciers would have advanced rapidly, burying everything in their path. Within centuries, the land that had once supported forests and rivers would have been covered by ice. If a civilization existed in Antarctica at the time of the Younger Dryas, it would have been destroyed. Its people would have fled, migrating to warmer regions. And the knowledge they carried with them, of astronomy, architecture, navigation, would have been passed down through oral tradition and ritual, eventually encoded in the myths and monuments of later cultures. This is the theory, and while it remains speculative, it is consistent with the evidence. The sudden appearance of advanced cultures in multiple regions around 10,000 to 8,000 BCE, the global distribution of similar architectural forms, the myths of a lost golden age, a great flood, a time when the gods walked the earth, and the maps, those impossible maps that show Antarctica without ice. The story of a great flood appears in cultures around the world. In Sumer, it is the story of Ziusudra, the king who was warned by the god Enki to build a boat and save humanity from a deluge sent by the gods. In Babylon, the story is told in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where Utnapishtim survives the flood and is granted immortality. In the Bible, it is the story of Noah. In Hindu mythology, it is Manu who is saved by the fish avatar of Vishnu. In Greek mythology, it is Deucalion and Pyrrha. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs speak of a great flood that destroyed the Fourth World. The consistency of these stories across cultures has led some researchers to propose that they are based on a real event, a global or near-global catastrophe that occurred in the distant past and was remembered in myth. The most likely candidate is the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago, when melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise by more than 120 meters. This would have inundated coastal regions around the world, submerging entire landscapes and displacing human populations. But the flood myths often describe something more than gradual sea level rise. They describe a sudden, catastrophic deluge, a wall of water that comes without warning, destroying everything in its path. This is consistent with the impact hypothesis. If a meteor bombardment caused the rapid melting of glaciers, the resulting floods would have been sudden and devastating. And if these floods occurred at the end of the Younger Dryas, around 11,600 years ago, they would coincide with the time period described in many flood myths. The Sumerian flood story is particularly interesting because it includes specific details. Ziusudra is warned by Enki, the god of wisdom and water, who tells him to build a boat and seal it with bitumen. The flood lasts for 7 days and 7 nights. When it subsides, Ziusudra makes offerings to the gods and is granted immortality. He is then taken to Dilmun, a paradise land described as a place where there is no sickness, no death, no suffering. Where is Dilmun? Some scholars identify Dilmun with the island of Bahrain in the Persian Gulf, but others suggest it is a mythical place, a memory of a lost homeland, a land that existed before the flood when the world was different. Could Dilmun be Antarctica, a place that was once a paradise with temperate climate and fertile land but was lost when the ice came? This is, again, speculative, but the pattern is there. The memory of a lost land, a land that was destroyed by water, or by ice, or by both. A land that was once home to an advanced people who carried their knowledge to other regions and became the gods of later cultures. And if that land was Antarctica, then the pyramid in the Ellsworth Mountains is not just a mountain. It is a monument, a marker, a memory in stone waiting to be read. Let us return to the Anunnaki. In Sumerian cosmology, the Anunnaki are the children of Anu, the sky god, and Kai, the earth goddess. They are divided into 2 groups, the Igigi, who remain in the heavens, and the Anunnaki proper, who descend to earth and govern human affairs. The Anunnaki are described as having great knowledge. They teach humans the arts of civilization, writing, mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, metallurgy. They are credited with building the first cities, the first temples, the first ziggurats. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, the Anunnaki are present at the creation of the world. They shape the cosmos, establish order, and assign roles to the gods. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, they decide the fate of humanity and control the forces of nature. But the Anunnaki are not omnipotent. They have needs. They require food and drink. They experience emotions, anger, jealousy, love. They make mistakes. They argue among themselves. In short, they behave like people. This has led some researchers to propose that the Anunnaki were not gods in the metaphysical sense, but historical figures, leaders, teachers, or explorers from an advanced civilization who arrived in Sumer and introduced technology that seemed divine to the indigenous population. If this is true, then the Sumerian texts are not myths, but records, encoded memories of real events, written in the language of theology because that was the only framework available to describe beings who possessed knowledge beyond the understanding of the time. And if the Anunnaki were real, where did they come from? The texts say they came from the Abzu, a place beneath the earth or across the sea. The word Abzu is sometimes translated as abyss or deep water. It is associated with the god Enki, who is described as the lord of the Abzu and the keeper of sacred knowledge. Some researchers interpret the Abzu as the underworld, a mythical realm of the dead, but others suggest it is a real place, a distant land separated from Sumer by ocean, a land that was once inhabited by the Anunnaki but was later lost. Could the Abzu be Antarctica? The idea is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Antarctica is separated from other continents by vast oceans. It is a land beneath the known world in the sense that it is at the bottom of the globe, and it is associated with water, not just the ocean but the ice itself, which is frozen water. If the Anunnaki came from Antarctica before the ice, and if they fled the continent when it froze, they would have carried with them the memory of their homeland, a memory that was encoded in the name Abzu, the place of deep water, and the knowledge they brought, the knowledge of astronomy, architecture, and engineering, would have been the knowledge of a civilization that had mapped the stars, built monumental structures, and navigated the seas. This knowledge would have been passed down through the Sumerian priesthood, preserved in temples and tablets, and eventually transmitted to other cultures, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, where it formed the foundation of their own civilizations. In this interpretation, the pyramids are not isolated monuments. They are replicas or echoes of structures built by the Anunnaki in their homeland, and the pyramid in Antarctica is the original, the first, the source from which all others were derived. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence for a connection between ancient pyramids is their astronomical alignment. The pyramids of Giza, for example, are aligned with extraordinary precision to the cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The Great Pyramid is oriented to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees, a feat that would require sophisticated knowledge of astronomy and careful observation of the stars. Moreover, the three pyramids of Giza, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, are positioned in a pattern that some researchers claim mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt. This is the basis of the Orion correlation theory, proposed by Robert Bovell in the 1990s. According to Bovell, the layout of the Giza pyramids is not random, but was designed to reflect the constellation Orion, which the ancient Egyptians associated with Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. The theory is controversial. Mainstream astronomers have pointed out that the alignment is not perfect. The positions of the pyramids do not exactly match the positions of the stars. But Bovell argues that the alignment was intentional, and that small discrepancies are due to the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble in the Earth's axis that causes the positions of the stars to shift over time. If the Orion correlation theory is correct, then the pyramids of Giza are not just tombs. They are a map, a representation of the sky anchored to the Earth, a cosmic blueprint. And the question becomes, why Orion? Orion is one of the most prominent constellations in the night sky. It is visible from both hemispheres and has been recognized by cultures around the world. In Egyptian mythology, Orion is associated with Osiris, the god who was killed and resurrected, and who ruled the afterlife. In Sumerian mythology, Orion is associated with the hero Gilgamesh. In Greek mythology, it is the hunter Orion, placed in the sky by Zeus. The constellation is also significant astronomically. Orion is located on the celestial equator, which means it rises in the east and sets in the west, just like the sun. It is a marker of the seasons, visible in the winter sky in the northern hemisphere and in the summer sky in the southern hemisphere. But perhaps most importantly, Orion contains three bright stars in a row: Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka, which are collectively known as Orion's belt. These stars are nearly perfectly aligned, and they are among the brightest stars in the sky. They are unmistakable. They are a pattern that stands out, a pattern that would have been recognized by any ancient sky watcher. And it is this pattern, three stars in a row, that is mirrored in the layout of the Giza pyramids. But Giza is not the only site with this alignment. Similar patterns have been found in other ancient structures. The three pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico are also arranged in a line, and some researchers have suggested they, too, are aligned with Orion's belt. The ancient city of Angkor Wat in Cambodia is oriented to the constellation Draco. Stonehenge in England is aligned with the solstices. The implication is clear. Ancient builders were not just constructing tombs or temples. They were encoding astronomical knowledge into their architecture. They were building observatories, calendars, maps of the cosmos. And if these builders shared a common source of knowledge, if they inherited their understanding of astronomy from an earlier civilization, then the alignment with Orion could be a signature, a marker left by the original architects. And if those architects came from Antarctica, then the pyramid in the Ellsworth Mountains could be the first site of this astronomical mapping, the original Orion monument from which all others were derived. One of the most powerful tools for understanding Antarctica's past is the ice core. Ice cores are cylinders of ice drilled from glaciers and ice sheets. They are time capsules, preserving a record of the Earth's climate, atmosphere, and environment over hundreds of thousands of years. Each layer of ice corresponds to a specific year, and by analyzing the composition of the ice, its oxygen isotopes, its trapped air bubbles, its dust and pollen content, scientists can reconstruct past temperatures, precipitation, volcanic activity, and even atmospheric composition. The longest ice core ever drilled in Antarctica is from the EPICA, European Project for Ice Coring in Antarctica. Site at Dome C. This core extends more than 3 kilometers into the ice and covers a time span of 800,000 years. It is a detailed record of 8 ice ages, showing the cyclical pattern of warming and cooling that has shaped the Earth's climate. What the ice cores reveal is that Antarctica has not always been as cold as it is today. During interglacial periods, the warm intervals between ice ages, temperatures in Antarctica were several degrees higher than they are now. The ice sheet was smaller. Parts of the coast and interior were ice-free. The most recent of these warm periods was the Holocene climate optimum, which occurred between 9,000 and 5,000 years ago. During this time, global temperatures were 1 to 2 degrees Celsius warmer than today. Sea levels were higher. Forests expanded into regions that are now tundra, and it is possible, though not proven, that parts of Antarctica were habitable. If a civilization existed in Antarctica during this period, it would have had a narrow window of habitability, perhaps a few thousand years, before the climate cooled and the ice returned. The ice core record also shows evidence of sudden climate events, rapid spikes in temperature, abrupt shifts in atmospheric composition, periods of intense volcanic activity. These events are markers of instability, times when the Earth's climate system was disrupted by external forces. One of the most dramatic of these events is the Younger Dryas, which appears in ice cores as a sudden drop in temperature around 12,800 years ago, followed by an equally sudden warming around 11,600 years ago. The cause of the Younger Dryas is still debated, but its effects are clear. It was a period of global upheaval, a time when the climate shifted rapidly and unpredictably. If the Younger Dryas was caused by a meteor impact, as some researchers suggest, the ice cores would contain evidence of the event. And indeed, some studies have found elevated levels of platinum and iridium in ice layers corresponding to the Younger Dryas period, elements that are rare on Earth but common in meteorites. This is not conclusive proof, but it is consistent with the impact hypothesis, and it suggests that the end of the last ice age was not a gradual transition, but a catastrophic event, one that would have destroyed coastal settlements, flooded river valleys, and buried entire landscapes under advancing glaciers. If Antarctica was inhabited at the time, its people would have had no choice but to leave, and the knowledge they carried with them would have been the knowledge of a world that no longer existed. And so, we return to the pyramid. It stands in the Ellsworth Mountains, at coordinates 79 degrees 5839.25 s, 81 degrees 5732.21 w. It is unnamed. It is unexplored. It is, according to geologists, a natural formation, a nunatak shaped by erosion. But what if it is not? What if beneath the ice there are chambers, passages, artifacts? What if the pyramid is not a mountain but a structure built by hands, not by wind and water? The only way to know is to excavate, to drill, to dig, to see what lies beneath. But this has not been done. The pyramid remains untouched. And perhaps that is intentional. Because if the pyramid is artificial, its discovery would change everything. It would prove that Antarctica was inhabited. It would prove that an advanced civilization existed before the rise of Egypt and Sumer. It would prove that much of what we believe about human history is incomplete, and that kind of discovery is dangerous. Not physically, but conceptually. It disrupts narratives. It challenges authority. It forces us to confront the possibility that we are not the first, that we are not the pinnacle, that there were others before us, and that they knew things we have forgotten. This is why Antarctica remains restricted. This is why exploration is controlled. This is why the pyramid stands, silent and unexamined in the frozen wastes of the Ellsworth Mountains. But the ice is melting, and as it melts it will reveal what it has hidden, slowly, inevitably. And when that happens, we will know. There is one more thread to follow, one more piece of the pattern. In Polynesian mythology, there are stories of a great land in the south, a place called Hawaii or Te Ikamoy, or by other names depending on the island and the storyteller. This land is described as the ancestral homeland, the place from which the Polynesian people came before they spread across the Pacific. The stories say that Hawaii was a land of abundance, with forests, rivers, and fertile soil. But it was also a land of danger, with volcanoes and earthquakes. Eventually, the people left Hawaii and traveled across the ocean, guided by the stars, settling on the islands of the Pacific. Where was Hawaii? Most scholars believe it is a mythical place, a symbolic representation of the ancestral past. But some researchers have proposed that Hawaii was a real location, and that the Polynesian migration was not a random dispersal, but a planned exodus from a land that was becoming uninhabitable. One candidate for Hawaii is Antarctica. The idea is based on the fact that Polynesian navigators were among the most skilled seafarers in human history. They crossed thousands of miles of open ocean, navigating by the stars, the currents, and the flight patterns of birds. They settled islands as remote as Easter Island, New Zealand, and Hawaii, establishing colonies in some of the most isolated places on Earth. If the Polynesians were capable of reaching these distant islands, they were certainly capable of reaching Antarctica, and there is linguistic evidence to support this. The word Hawaii is phonetically similar to Hawaii, the name of the largest island in the Hawaiian chain, but it is also similar to Havilah, a land mentioned in the Bible, and to Abzu, the Sumerian underworld. The root of the word may be related to water, or to place beneath or across the sea. Moreover, Polynesian oral traditions include descriptions of icebergs, snow, and cold climates, things that would have been unfamiliar to people living on tropical islands, unless they had ancestral memories of a colder place. This is speculative, of course, but the pattern is there. The memory of a southern land, a land that was lost, a land that was once home. And if the Polynesians did come from Antarctica, then the pyramid in the Ellsworth Mountains could be part of their heritage, a monument built by their ancestors before the ice came. And so, we reach the end of this expedition, not with answers but with questions, not with certainty but with curiosity. The pyramid stands in the Ellsworth Mountains beneath the wind and the silence. It may be a mountain, it may be a monument, we do not know, we have not asked. We have not looked, but the pattern is there. The maps that show Antarctica without ice. The fossil record that proves Antarctica was once warm. The Sumerian tablets that speak of gods who came from the Abzu. The global distribution of pyramids, aligned with the stars. The flood myths that remember a world submerged. The Polynesian stories of a southern homeland. Each piece on its own is inconclusive, but together they suggest something: a memory, a possibility, a world that was and then was not. And the pyramid is the key, the marker, the remnant. It waits in the ice, patient and silent, holding its secrets. And as the ice melts, it will reveal them, not all at once, not in a single dramatic discovery, but slowly, layer by layer, year by year. And when it does, we will know. We will know if the pyramid is a mountain or a monument. We will know if Antarctica was inhabited or empty. We will know if there was a civilization before the ice, or if the ice has always been there, covering only stone and silence. But until then, we can only wonder. We can only imagine. We can only trace the patterns and follow the threads and ask the questions that have no answers. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the not knowing is the point. The space between certainty and myth, where curiosity lives and stories breathe. This is where we are. This is where the pyramid waits, in the ice, in the silence, in the memory of a world that might have been. And so drift now. Let the questions settle like snow. Let the silence expand, cold and clean. Let the pyramid stand in your mind, sharp against the white, waiting, waiting for the ice to melt, waiting for the memory to return, waiting for us to remember what we forgot. Good night, traveler, wherever you are, whatever time it is. Thank you for listening. Thank you for wandering with me into the cold, into the quiet, into the edges of what we know and what we've lost. Sleep well. And when you wake, perhaps the ice will have melted a little more, and perhaps we will know.